But she was strong until the end. Stronger than me.
What was funny was I wasn't very attracted to her physically.
AJ and Patsy Cantrell. That crime sparked the largest manhunt in state history.
Man, the biggest thing that has hurt me all these years.
My main fight right now is, of course, to stop April 27th from arriving.
Bilbeck was carried out at 6:13 p.m. The execution went as scheduled and took...
Keep going because we already have your family in sight. You scream or anything, we're gonna shoot.
Opposition. Gaskin's last words, according to someone who witnessed his execution.
Number 15, Amber McLaughlin. On the evening of Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023, Missouri-born witness to a groundbreaking event, the putting down of the first transgender woman in the United States. Amber McLaughlin, a 49-year-old openly transgender woman, met her fate for a 2003 slaying. This unprecedented putting down marked a significant moment in American history. Amber McLaughlin's story began with her relationship with Beverly Gunther, a former girlfriend prior to her transition. Following their breakup, McLaughlin's behavior took a disturbing turn. She began stalking Gunther, even going as far as hiding inside the St. Louis office building where Gunther worked. Gunther sought a restraining order against McLaughlin, and on occasion, police officers would even have to escort her to her car for safety.
Supreme Court. McLaughlin was convicted and sentenced to death for the 2003.
Read tonight, the death sentence for Amber McLaughlin was carried out for the
injection. The Department of Corrections pronounced her dead just before 7 o'clock.
Even today, people have asked me, well, why are you out here today? Because it's going to happen. Yes, it is going to happen.
I think I had accepted that today would be the end.
It's okay to kill anybody, including the victims in these cases. But in addition to that,
but she was strong until the end. Stronger than me.
Murder of Beverly Gunther, a death sentence is carried out. Tonight, shortly after 6.
However, on the night of November 20th, 2003, Gunther did not return home, prompting her concerned neighbors to contact the police. Investigating officers discovered a trail of blood and a broken knife handle near Gunther's car at her office building. McLaughlin eventually led the police to a location near the Mississippi River in St. Louis, where Gunther's lifeless body had been dumped. Authorities alleged that she had been physically attacked and brutally knifed with a steak knife. In 2006, McLaughlin was convicted of first-degree slaying. Despite the jury's deadlock on the verdict, a judge gave her capital punishment, making Missouri one of 2 states where a judge possesses the authority to impose the penalty. A subsequent court ruling in 2016 called for a new sentence hearing, only for a federal appeals court panel to reinstate the penalty in 2021. Amber McLaughlin's ending took place at the Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Missouri. She shared her final moments with her spiritual advisor as the lethal dose of pentobarbital coursed through her veins. McLaughlin expressed remorse in a written statement, acknowledging her actions and asserting her loving and caring nature. This ending set itself apart from others due to its historical significance. Prior to McLaughlin's case, the Penalty Information Center's database, tracking slaying since the reinstatement of the penalty, had recorded 1,558 individuals executed, with only 17 of them being women. Remarkably, there had never been a recorded instance of an openly transgender inmate facing ending. McLaughlin's transition had begun approximately 3 years prior while she was incarcerated, illustrating the challenges faced by transgender individuals within the correctional system. Number 14. Robert Fratta. In a dramatic turn of events, Robert Fratta, a former suburban Houston police officer, met his final fate on January 10, 2023. Found guilty of orchestrating the slaying of his estranged wife during a bitter divorce and custody battle almost 3 decades ago, Fratta, now 65, received a lethal injection at the state penitentiary in Huntsville. As a powerful sedative pentobarbital flowed through his veins, Fratta lay strapped to the demise chamber gurney. His spiritual advisor, Barry Brown, knelt beside him, offering prayers for broken hearts and grieving souls. When asked for a final statement, Fratta uttered a solemn no. The lethal drugs took effect and Fratta closed his eyes, his breaths gradually transforming into deep snores until all movement ceased. Prosecutors had presented a compelling case against Fratta, asserting that he had masterminded a slaying for hire plot.
Farrah came home, and she pulled her car right this straight ahead here, and then.
What was funny was I wasn't very attracted to her physically.
And they heard the shot, saw her go down, and then he stepped out and he stepped back.
I felt that as she was coming over to my apartment and she'd want to cook for me.
He didn't want custody of his children, but he filed for custody simply because.
He also got a consent to search his car.
So no, she didn't meet the physical attributes of what I was looking for in a wife, but I felt
it was a way of winning for him. As the divorce proceedings went along, he
liked bigger women because I was always on the small side, and so hair, I don't go. I've been cutting my own hair since the '80s. I'm not one like spends $400.
The neighbors across the street saw that, and they were used to her coming in like that, like church and humble, with his 2 boys. And at the time this happened,
became more angry and very bitter, and began to approach people saying, "Would you?"
3 years ago, well, actually about 4 years ago was when I went to go see him. So I did.
Joseph Prystash served as the middleman, hiring Howard Guidry as a shooter. Farrah Frater, Robert's wife, fell victim to Guidry's bullets, her life extinguished in her own garage in Atascocita, a Houston suburb. Despite maintaining his innocence, Frater had previously expressed a desire to see his wife lifeless, telling acquaintances of his plans. Frater's ending faced several legal hurdles. His lawyers argued that evidence of witness hypnotization had been withheld, leading to a skewed testimony. They also raised concerns about expired and unsafe ending drugs. However, these appeals ultimately failed, allowing the ending to proceed. Robert Frater's fate had been delayed for over an hour, pending the resolution of multiple appeals. The U.S. Supreme Court, Texas Supreme Court, and Texas Court of Criminal Appeals all weighed in, affirming his sentence. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles also unanimously rejected his plea for clemency. Frater's journey to the chamber was marked by a tumultuous legal history. Initially given capital punishment in 1996, his conviction was overturned due to the inadmissibility of confessions from his co-conspirators. A federal judge later retried and resentenced him in 2009, describing Frater as egotistical, misogynistic, and vile. As a first ending in Texas this year, Robert Frater's demise marked a somber moment. While his estranged wife's father, Lex Bachwer, played an instrumental role in raising their 3 children, Frater showed no remorse toward his family during his final moments. Andy Cahan, Director of Victim Services and Advocacy for Crime Stoppers of Houston, lamented Frater's continued cowardice, noting the missed opportunity for reconciliation. Number 13. Scott Eisenberg. In a long-awaited resolution, Scott James Eisenberg, age 62, was executed in Oklahoma for a series of crimes committed 2 decades ago. Convicted of slaying an elderly couple, A.J. Cantrell and Patsy Cantrell, Eisenberg received a lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. As the drugs flowed through his veins, Eisenberg expressed peace and love for his children. In the chamber, he exchanged words of affection with his spiritual advisor and mouthed, "I love you," to his daughter and attorneys. Eisenberg's breathing grew labored and he was declared unconscious before ultimately being pronounced lifeless. His attorneys did not contest his responsibility for the slayings, but argued that the slayings were unplanned and impulsive. Despite their plea for clemency, the state's Pardon and Parole Board rejected their recommendation by a 3-2 vote. Members of the Cantrell family, after enduring years of pain, expressed their frustration at the lengthy process, leading to Eisenberg's ending. They called for improvements in mental health treatment and the handling of domestic violence cases, emphasizing that help should be provided to attackers early on to prevent future tragedies. Prosecutors detailed Eisenberg's actions, alleging that he broke into the Cantrell's home to lie in wait for his ex-girlfriend, but ended up slaying the couple instead. Eisenberg was convicted of first-degree slaying for taking the life of A.J. Cantrell and second-degree slaying for neutralizing Patsy Cantrell.
Statement, Eisenberg told everyone that he told the truth. His conscience was clear and he loved.
I must say that 20 years is too long for justice to be served.
Eisenberg said, my conscience is clear completely. I love my children.
People to use that word to me because the only way we would ever have closure is if they came back to us. It is an important moral moment. It's an important moment of
AJ and Patsy Cantrell. That crime sparked the largest manhunt in state history.
And they tracked him down in the couple's car. Erin Christie, 2 News, Oklahoma.
On a case-by-case basis, and they have no plans to make any amendments based.
After the double homicide, Eisenberg targeted his ex-girlfriend's home, shooting her son and assaulting her mother. Both survived the attacks. Eisenberg evaded capture for over a month, hiding in wooded areas before fleeing to Arkansas. There, he committed further crimes, including kidnapping a physician and his wife. His capture finally came after being shot by the physician during a confrontation. Before his ending, Eisenberg engaged in a legal battle to have his spiritual advisor present, which was initially denied due to the advisor's anti-demise penalty activism. However, the decision was reversed and Eisenberg's wish was granted based on a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that mandated accommodation for inmates' religious requests during their endings. The process in Oklahoma involved a 3-drug lethal injection method, rendering the person unconscious with midazolam, followed by a paralytic agent and potassium chloride to stop the heart. Number 12. Leonard Taylor. In a gripping and tragic tale, Raheem Taylor, formerly known as Leonard Taylor, met his fate in Missouri. Convicted of the slaying of his living girlfriend Angela Rowe and her 3 young children, Taylor maintained his innocence.
One of the last legal efforts to save his life failed when Governor Parson denied.
Like all 3 of the children would run up to the top of the hill and clap their hands, you know, just the sweetness, you know.
It don't make the pain no easier, but I make it.
They deserve a thorough review to determine if Taylor is actually guilty or if he's actually in.
My decision, he'll be executed 100 times over because no one should take another life.
Man, the biggest thing that has hurt me all these years, how has it affected me being on death row or innocent?
The quadruple murder here back in 2008. Leonard Taylor, who is now...
It's terrifying. But if he didn't do it, we cannot hold him accountable for it.
In this case, and there have been many questionable things.
Claiming to have been in another state at the time of the slayings. Despite his assertions, he faced numerous rejections of his innocence claims and appeals. The ending took place at the state prison in Bonne Terre, making Taylor the 3rd Missouri inmate to be given capital punishment since November of 2022. It marked the nation's 5th slaying of the year, all conducted by lethal injection. As the 5 grams of pentobarbital coursed through his veins, Taylor's body displayed movement, followed by a few deep breaths before becoming still. In his final statement, he expressed his belief that Muslims transcend passing away, living eternally in the hearts of loved ones. Taylor's innocence claims garnered support from various civil rights and religious groups, including the National NAACP and the Midwest Innocence Project. However, these efforts were futile, with St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney Wesley Bell and Republican Governor Mike Parson declining to grant a hearing or clemency, respectively. While it was established that Taylor was not in Missouri when the bodies were discovered, the precise timing of the slayings remained uncertain. The initial medical examiner's findings suggested they occurred while Taylor was in California, but conflicting testimonies and evidence during the trial raised doubts. Taylor's attorney presented witnesses who claimed to have seen Rowe alive after Taylor's departure, and his daughter in California insisted on phone contact during Taylor's visit. Nonetheless, former prosecutor Bob McCulloch dismissed these alibis as fabrications. Authorities contended that Rowe and the children were slayed on the night of November 22nd or 23rd, a period when Taylor was still in St. Louis. Notably, DNA evidence linked Rowe's blood to Taylor's glasses, and witnesses observed Taylor discarding a gun into a sewer. Additionally, Taylor's brother informed the police that Taylor had confessed to the crime, further reinforcing the prosecution's case. The ending of Raheem Taylor concluded a tragic chapter in the lives of Angela Rowe's family, who continued to grapple with the loss of their loved ones. Though justice was served, the aftermath of such a heinous act leaves deep wounds that are not easily healed. Number 11. John Ballantyne. Amid a flurry of court proceedings and appeals, John Leslie Ballantyne, a 54-year-old black man, was executed in Texas for the slaying of 3 white teenagers. Ballantyne had been given capital punishment almost 25 years ago for shooting the victims in the head while they slept. His lawyers raised concerns about juror misconduct and racial prejudice during his trial, but their appeals were dismissed by the Court of Criminal Appeals. The victims included Ballantyne's ex-girlfriend's brother, who disapproved of their interracial relationship and had previously threatened Ballantyne in a racially charged dispute. Ballantyne confessed to the slayings, but his current lawyers argue that racism tainted the trial, influencing the jury's decision to impose a sentence rather than life in prison. In his final statement, Ballantyne expressed gratitude to his supporters, apologized for his actions, and expressed readiness for his fate. The date had faced setbacks when a state district judge recalled the ending warrant due to a lack of proper notification to Ballantyne's lawyer. However, prosecutors appealed to the Court of Criminal Appeals, which reinstated the order and the warrant. Ballantyne's defense lawyers sought to halt the ending to file new appeals based on newly discovered evidence regarding the jury's decision.
But if I have to see it, I mean, I will let you see it for the last breath.
Of justice, this is probably the worst case I think I've ever seen.
My main fight right now is, of course, to stop April 27th from arriving.
That he could sort of have the score of putting the first Latina on.
The evidence highlighted the racist views of the jury foreperson who frequently used racial slurs and harbored prejudice against black people in interracial relationships. The foreperson withheld crucial information during jury selection and deliberations and influenced other jurors to vote for the penalty. Ballantyne's lawyers also scrutinized their own defense team for racist attitudes and disparaging remarks about their client. The ending of John Leslie Ballantyne was carried out amidst a backdrop of racial tension and questions surrounding the fairness of his trial. The case exemplifies the challenges and complexities inherent in capital punishment, particularly when issues of race and prejudice intersect with the legal system. Number 10. Donald Dilbeck. Donald David Dilbeck, convicted of knifing Faye Van to his passing away outside the Tallahassee Mall, was executed in Florida after a 3.5-year hiatus in endings. The curtain rose in the chamber of Florida State Prison, revealing Dilbeck on a gurney restrained with leather straps. As witnesses looked on through a window, he used his last words to criticize Governor Ron DeSantis, expressing his disbelief that DeSantis had inflicted greater harm on people than he had. With a lethal chemical cocktail flowing through his veins, Dilbeck's final moments were marked by coughing, snoring, and eventually stillness.
Been on death row since the 1990s when he was convicted of stabbing a woman to death after a...
Dilbeck was carried out at 6:13 p.m. The execution went as scheduled and took...
It took more than 30 years for that execution to happen, and according to corrections officials, the lethal
Mr. Dilbeck had a visit this afternoon with his spiritual advisor.
injection was flawlessly carried out.
Wait 32 years to get your closure is actually forced you to put your healing process.
Say anything.
He did provide a last statement.
Can you say what it was?
I did not record it, nor did he provide it in writing.
Over and talk to us on camera while on the property. In fact, you can see that they are keeping us separate.
The ending occurred amidst renewed interest in capital punishment by Governor DeSantis and lawmakers in Florida, who sought to make it easier to impose the penalty. Dilbeck's demise warrant was signed by DeSantis, who proposed a minimum jury vote of 8-4 in favor of the penalty. Legislation was pending to establish this as the minimum requirement, allowing judges to override juries that chose life imprisonment. 27 witnesses, including some of Van's family members, observed the ending. In a written statement, Tony and Laura Van expressed gratitude to Governor DeSantis for carrying out the sentence, acknowledging the pain caused by the brutal slaying of their mother. Dilbeck's journey to the chamber began in 1979 when, at the age of 15, he knifed a man in Indiana. Fleeing from authorities, he ended up in Florida and was convicted of shooting a Lee County Sheriff's deputy. Initially sentenced to life in prison, Dilbeck escaped and later committed the heinous slaying of Faye Van in Tallahassee. While new appeals were filed, including arguments about fetal alcohol disorder and a troubled upbringing, the ending proceeded. Penalty opponents staged demonstrations highlighting the belief that redemption is always possible and that the state should prioritize protecting vulnerable individuals. Number 9. Arthur Brown. On a March evening, Arthur Brown Jr. was executed in Texas for for the shooting of 4 individuals in a Houston drug house back in 1992. Throughout the years leading up to his ending, Brown consistently maintained his innocence, claiming that crucial evidence proving his innocence had been withheld by the courts and prosecutors. As he lay on the gurney, Brown expressed his belief that the state was committing slaying rather than serving justice. He stated that if he was innocent, his co-defendant, who had been executed in 2006, was also innocent, implying that an innocent man had passed away before. Despite new public defenders taking up the case and filing legal claims, including evidence of another suspect,
30 years after the deaths, their killer now has a date for his execution.
Keep going because we already have your family in sight. You scream or anything, we're going to shoot.
Prosecutors say Arthur Brown Jr. could have been sentenced to death this month.
Her job, we believe, was to have signed the first.
Weren't there, they were there. They were the ones that did this to my family.
But today, on the 3rd attempt, we now know Brown's execution date.
What do we want? Stop execution! What do we want it?
Now! A statement, they had the same sentiment. They said today is about relief, that they can find
executing anybody, regardless of guilt, innocence, mental illness, fully competent.
Oh, and it lodged in there between my cracked skull and my skin.
and arguments of intellectual disability and racial bias, the appeals were unsuccessful in both state and federal courts. The courts deemed the claims insufficient to warrant further consideration at such a late stage. The case against Brown was surrounded by controversy. The trial included allegations of police and prosecutorial coercion of witnesses, shocking recantations on the witness stand, and Brown's sister being jailed for contempt and later charged with perjury. Brown and 2 other men were convicted of the ending-style slayings of 4 individuals, while 2 others survived the attack. The trial relied heavily on eyewitness testimony from the survivors, despite inconsistencies and doubts about their identification. The physical evidence linking Brown to the crime was later discredited, but the court upheld his sentence, asserting the jury would likely have convicted him even without the ballistic evidence. During the appeals process, evidence surfaced indicating that Marcus Terrell Hill, a drug dealer who was slayed in a similar robbery attempt in Alabama, may have been responsible for the slayings. However, the existence of this evidence has been suppressed by the Harris County District Attorney's Office, according to Brown's attorneys. In addition to asserting his innocence, Brown's lawyers argue that he was intellectually disabled and, therefore, the ending would violate the 8th Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. However, the prosecution contended that Brown had a learning disability rather than an intellectual disability, citing his increased IQ scores in middle school. Despite the last-minute appeals, including claims of innocence and intellectual disability, the ending proceeded. Brown was injected with a lethal dose of pentobarbital and pronounced lifeless 17 minutes later. The case raised renewed doubts about the reliability and fairness of the criminal justice system, leaving unanswered questions about the possibility of an innocent man passing away. Number 8. Lewis Gaskin. In Florida, Lewis Gaskin faced ending on Roe for the 1989 slaying of Robert and Georgette Sturmfels.
Execution of a man who murdered a Flagler County couple.
Lewis Gaskin is scheduled to die by lethal.
The motion after the Supreme Court rejected his appeal Thursday. This would be the second execution in Florida this year after
opposition. Gaskin's last words, according to someone who witnessed his execution, were, quote,
there was a sheet over him, so you don't see how he's tightly, but you look at the arms.
Gaskin acting under a delusional belief system in that he believed he was a ninja, sort of fighting
people who the event organizer says traveled more than 100 miles from Daytona protesting.
For someone's execution, it's done in the name of the people of Florida. And
the couple was tragically shot on December 20th, 1989, and Gaskin was convicted and given capital punishment in 1990. After years of legal battles, Governor Ron DeSantis signed Gaskin's warrant on March 13th. Despite appeals filed by Gaskin, the state Supreme Court rejected them, and a judge denied his request for a stay of ending on Tuesday. During his trial, jurors recommended the sentence in an 8-4 vote, a decision that was accepted by the judge. In addition to the slaying charges, Gaskin was also convicted of armed robbery, burglary, and attempted slaying committed on the same night. The details surrounding the crime and Gaskin's subsequent trial captivated public attention. The heinous act of violence against the Sternfels couple, combined with the multiple charges against Gaskin, added layers of complexity and intensity to the case. As the ending loomed, emotions ran high, and debates regarding capital punishment and the role of the justice system echoed throughout the state. The final moments leading up to Gaskin's endings were filled with tension and anticipation as supporters and opponents of the penalty voiced their opinions. Number 7. Darrell Barwick. In a chilling case that shook Florida, Darrell B. Barwick was executed for the brutal slaying of Rebecca Went in 1986. Just months after being released from prison for physical attack, Barwick broke into Went's Panama City apartment, where he knifed her 37 times after she resisted his robbery attempt. Barwick's ending took place at Florida State Prison and was confirmed by the Office of Governor Ron DeSantis. The U.S. Supreme Court denied his final appeal for a stay of ending. Although Barwick had spoken with his family members by phone in recent days, no relatives of the victim were scheduled to witness the ending.
Death row inmate Darrell Barwick is down to his last appeal in his attempt to avoid execution.
Rebecca Went, and while armed with a knife, did assault the victim by stabbing her 38 times.
Darrell Barwick spent the majority of his life on Florida death row.
Barwick was carried out at 6:14 p.m. The execution took place without incident.
Pain, knowing that she's going to die.
The details of Went's slaying were horrifying. Barwick had observed her sunbathing and followed her back to her apartment intending to rob her. When she resisted, he unleashed a frenzied attack, knifing her repeatedly as she fought for her life. Authorities discovered Went's body with signs of a failed attempt to remove her bathing suit, but no evidence of physical attack. Semen found on a blanket near her body implicated Barwick. Barwick's conviction was initially overturned in 1989 due to prosecutorial misconduct, but he was convicted again in a retrial in 1992. The jury unanimously recommended the penalty. Notably, Barwick had committed the physical attack just months before slaying Went, confessing that he slayed her to avoid returning to prison. The tragic case of Darrell Barwick serves as a grim reminder of the heinous acts individuals are capable of and the irreversible consequences they face. The ending brought some measure of justice to the victim and her loved ones while highlighting the ongoing debates surrounding capital punishment and its effectiveness as a deterrent. Number 6. Michael Tisius. In a case that garnered international attention and raised questions about the penalty, Michael Tisius was executed in Missouri for the slaying of 2 jail guards in 2000. Despite pleas for clemency, including from jurors who had originally voted for the penalty but had since changed their minds, Tisius's case proceeded. Tisius's lawyers had argued that one of the jurors from the sentencing trial was unable to read, a requirement under Missouri law. However, his legal appeals were exhausted, and the U.S. Supreme Court denied a stay of ending, rejecting the argument that his age at the time of the crime, 19, should spare him from the penalty. Governor Mike Parson, a former sheriff, stated that Tisius's case received fair and careful review throughout the judicial process, emphasizing the brutality of the slayings. While organizations and institutions lobbied for clemency, at least one surviving family member of a victim supported the ending, believing justice would be served.
The court scheduled the execution of Michael Tisius for June 6th. A jury convicted him of...
Tisius's execution is set for June 6th, exactly 1 week from today.
This man responsible for the death of 2 Randolph County jail guards was executed this evening.
Just a couple of hours ago, both of the families of Leon Egley and Jason
was asked whether there is any reason that the lawful execution of Michael Tisius for the murders of Jason Acton.
The crimes occurred when Tisius and Tracy Bullington attempted to free an inmate from the county jail. In the process, Tisius shot and slayed 2 jail employees before fleeing. Tisius's lawyers presented arguments of childhood attack, neglect, limited mental capacity, and influence from an older inmate. The case highlights the complexities and emotional impact of penalty decisions. Jurors who had initially supported the penalty later expressed remorse and advocated for life imprisonment instead. This raises questions about the legal system's consideration of jurors' emotional trauma and the ability to address potential wrong decisions. As Tisius's ending took place, it sparked reflection on America's continued use of state-sanctioned homicide and the ongoing debates surrounding capital punishment. The case served as a reminder of the evolving public sentiment regarding the ending penalty and the challenges faced by states in carrying out endings. Number 5. Dwayne Owen. In a long-awaited culmination of justice, Florida executed Roe inmate Dwayne Owen by lethal injections. Owen's heinous crimes, committed nearly 4 decades ago, involved the physical attack and fatal knifing of 14-year-old Karen Slattery and the physical attack and slaying of 38-year-old Georgiana Warden. As the ending took place, Owen chose not to make a final statement, leaving his victims' families to confront the painful memories alone. Among them was Slattery's younger sister Debbie Johnson, now a deputy sheriff, who expressed a bittersweet sense of closure.
Babysitter in Delray Beach in March 1984 that raped and killed a 38-year-old mother of 2.
When the curtain rose to reveal the execution chamber, Dwayne Owen's head was shaved and his eyes up.
It was extremely emotional because Slattery family may now close Karen's book, put it on a shelf, and move forward.
Warning to you, the families of Karen Slattery and Georgia Warden will be.
With tears in her eyes, Johnson spoke of the rain falling outside and the hope for a rainbow, a sign that her sister was watching over them. She reflected on the absence of remorse from Owen, stating that while he passed away with dignity, his victims were denied the same. The details of the crimes were haunting. Slattery was brutally attacked while babysitting 2 children in Delray Beach. The innocent teenager endured multiple knife wounds and was physically attacked within the confines of the home. Just 2 months later, Owen struck again, this time targeting Warden in Boca Raton. Armed with a hammer, he snuffed out her life as her young children slept nearby, their peaceful slumber contrasting with the brutality that unfolded. Owen's path to ending was a lengthy one, marked by numerous appeals and insanity defenses. However, this year, Governor Ron DeSantis signed his warrant, finally setting the stage for the ultimate consequence. As the chapter closes on Owen's life, the families of Karen Slattery and Georgiana Warden, those scarred by the unimaginable loss, can begin to heal. The ending brings a sense of resolution and a chance to move forward, holding on to cherished memories while leaving the darkness of the past behind. Number 4. Gary Green. In the heartland of Texas, the chilling tale of Gary Green unfolded, a story that raised poignant questions about mental illness and intellectual disability in the face of a sentence. On a fateful Tuesday evening, Green, aged 51, was executed for the slaying of his wife, Lovetta Armstead, and her young daughter, Jasmine Montgomery, a crime committed in 2009. Court records revealed the harrowing details. After discovering that his wife intended to annul their marriage, Green's emotions spiraled out of control. In a fit of rage, he fatally knifed Armstead and drowned Montgomery in a bathtub. Consumed by guilt, Green turned himself in and confessed to the brutal slayings that had shattered their lives. As the final moments approached, Green offered his last words, seeking forgiveness from those he had left behind. Quote, "I took not 1, but 2 people that we all loved, and I had to live with that while I was here. I ask that you forgive me, not for me, but for y'all," he pleaded. And with that, at 7:07 p.m. on Tuesday, he was pronounced lifeless. However, throughout the legal proceedings, questions lingered about Green's mental state and intellectual capacity. While experts testified during his trial about his likely schizoaffective disorder, his defense team contended that his condition was not adequately explored. They argued that a deeper examination of his severe cognitive limitations and mental illness could have shed light on his moral culpability. Green's appeals and pleas for a delay to undergo further testing of his intellectual disability were met with resistance.
Police tell us Gary Green was waiting here at this house for his wife. She'd recently filed for divorce.
In the interview, he says, "I've never seen anything like that, only in TV and the movies. I've never seen it in real life."
He'd have them outside, and the little girl would ride her bicycle, and he'd be out with them.
Today, after being stabbed allegedly by his stepfather, police say.
Despite the U.S. Supreme Court's prohibition of executing individuals with intellectual disabilities, Texas defines this disability based on IQ scores and other criteria. Green's IQ score of 78 fell within the borderline range, raising questions about the validity of his sentence. Moreover, Green's tragic story intertwined with the controversial use of expired drugs in Texas's protocol. The state's reliance on extended use by dates for lethal injections sparked legal battles and concerns about potential violations of the constitutional prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. Number 3. Antonio Franklin. The scheduled ending of Antonio Sanchez Franklin in Ohio loomed on the horizon, a chilling reminder of the horrific crimes that had shattered a family. Convicted and given capital punishment for the brutal slayings of his grandparents and uncle in 1997, Franklin had spent the past 24 years on Ohio's row awaiting his fate. Franklin's troubled upbringing added layers of complexity to his story. Raised by an alcoholic and abusive mother, he managed to excel in school until circumstances led him to live with his grandparents and uncle. It was during his adolescence that Franklin began to exhibit signs of deteriorating mental state, plagued by fears of extraterrestrial abduction and spiraling into drug use.
She passed back in 2020, but before that, her and her son Ricardo started this piece. Now, since Tony's passing, there's various memorials here at Duncan.
I think that's the main point about it. Like, that's just the purpose behind it, is that we don't want these names to be forgotten. They've just really embraced us and made us feel like we have a voice and that we're important still.
The fatal night unfolded on April 18, 1997, when Franklin, facing the prospect of finding his own place to live, clashed with his uncle during a heated argument. In a fit of rage, Franklin unleashed a savage attack, wielding a baseball bat against his family members. His grandparents and uncle suffered severe beatings at his hands. But the horror didn't end there. Franklin escalated the violence, resorting to gunfire, fatally shooting his grandmother in the head. And to cover his tracks, he set the house ablaze and fled to Tennessee in his own grandmother's vehicle. However, his escape was short-lived as the police swiftly apprehended him. Blood-soaked and armed with the slaying weapon, Franklin was taken into custody. The aftermath revealed the extent of the tragedy. 3 lives were lost. Franklin's grandmother, Ophelia, succumbed to either the gunshot or blunt force trauma, while his grandfather, Ivory, and his uncle, Anthony, fell victim to a combination of beatings and smoke inhalation as the fire consumed the house. Franklin's confession to the police shed light on his motivations, citing mistreatment by his family as a catalyst for his violent acts. He further alleged that his uncle had physically attacked him when he was just 14 years old. Throughout the legal proceedings, Franklin's mental state remained a focal point. Questions of competency arose, and while the tests initially deemed him fit to stand trial, his condition deteriorated over time. Disruptions during the trial and changes in his personality led to recommendations for restraints. Despite appeals challenging his competency, Franklin was ultimately found guilty and given capital punishment for the heinous slayings he committed. Number 2. Stanley L. Fitzpatrick. In 2001, Lincoln Heights, Ohio was shattered by the heinous crimes committed by Stanley Fitzpatrick. With a troubled past and a drug-induced descent into madness, Stanley brutally slayed Dorothea Hayes, her daughter Shanae, and their neighbor Elton Rose. Shanae's discovery of Stanley smoking crack led to a violent altercation, with Stanley inflicting fatal knife wounds and vicious blows on her.
14 years after his conviction, a man who killed 3 people in the tri-state is now scheduled to die.
Later, he took Dorothea's life in a chillingly brutal attack, leaving a trail of blood and a damning hatchet. When confronted by a police sergeant, Stanley pulled a gun, narrowly escaping in a stolen cruiser. Eventually caught, he confessed to the slayings, driven by substance-induced psychosis. Stanley's guilt was confirmed, leading to his sentence. The scars left on Lincoln Heights serve as a haunting reminder of the darkness that can consume a soul. Number 1. Richard Eugene Glossip. Richard Eugene Glossip, an American prisoner, currently resides on row at Oklahoma State Penitentiary. His conviction for commissioning the 1997 slaying of Barry Van Treese has drawn international attention due to the lack of substantial evidence against him. The primary witness, Justine Sneed, who actually committed the crime.
Well, a group of 20 attorneys from across the country teaming up to look into the case of Oklahoma death row inmate Richard.
The guy is guilty, then been by all means, we'll say execute.
And tonight, a group hoping they may be able to stop it for good.
Justin Sneed pointed a finger at Richard Glossip, and that's the biggest piece of evidence that they've got.
Had a drug addiction and agreed to testify against Glossip in exchange for a plea deal. Despite the weak case against him, Glossop's appeals for a stay of ending gained traction. After a botched ending in Oklahoma, he became a central figure in the 2015 Supreme Court case Glossop versus Gross, which upheld the constitutionality of the 3-drug protocol. And that's all for this video, folks. We'll see you next time.